I came home early from a work trip to surprise my girlfriend, and instead, I was the one who got surprised. Her name was Alicia. Wait, no, I need to be precise about this. She was my fiancée. 8 months into an engagement. 2 years before that of what I thought was the kind of relationship people write about when they're trying to explain to younger people what love is actually supposed to feel like. I walked through the front door of the townhouse we shared in Kitchener, Ontario, dropped my bag in the hallway and heard voices coming from upstairs. 2 voices. One of them was hers. The other one belonged to my older brother. I didn't run. I didn't call out. Something in my body just stopped. Like a system shutting down before it can process a fatal error. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for what felt like a full minute, listening, making absolutely sure I was understanding what I was hearing. The door to our bedroom was open. I stood in the doorway. Put up. My brother saw me first. He scrambled. She screamed. I turned around and walked back downstairs, sat down on the kiosolf, a glass of water from the bottle on the coffee table. My hands were completely steady. That's the part I still can't explain. My hands were completely steady. They came downstairs eventually. My brother was still buttoning his shirt. She was holding her cardigan closed at the front, like that was somehow relevant. They were both talking at the same time, which meant I couldn't hear either of them, which was fine because I wasn't listening anyway. I looked at my brother. I said, "Get out of my house." He left. She stayed. She was crying before she even sat down. She said it had only happened twice. She said she didn't know why. She said she loved me. She said she was sorry. She used the word mistake 4 times in under 3 minutes. I counted because I needed something to count. I said, "I need you to leave too." She said my name. I said please. She left. I sat in that townhouse alone until about 2 in the morning. Then I called the only person I knew would pick up at that hour, without asking too many questions. My buddy Reese, who I'd known since we were 11 years old playing AAA hockey in Guelph together. He answered on the second Meissen ring. I told him what happened. He said, "I'm coming over." I said, "Don't." He said, "I'm already putting my shoes on." He stayed until sunrise. We didn't talk much. He just sat there with me, which is the most useful thing another person can do when your entire life has just been rearranged without your permission. The next week was practical. I called a lawyer. A family law paralegal in Waterloo, who a coworker had recommended after her own divorce. I went through our lease, our shared accounts, the furniture we'd bought together at IKEA on a Sunday afternoon 2 years ago. Arguing about whether the dark wood or the light wood looked better in the living room. I started separating everything that was mine from everything that was hers, and I was methodical about it because methodical was the only speed I had left. I didn't reach out to my brother. I didn't reach out to her. I blocked them both on everything, changed the locks, and started looking for a smaller apartment. Then my parents called. My mother called first. She said she'd heard what happened. She said she was devastated. She said she couldn't believe her son would do something like this. I assumed she was talking about my brother. She was not. She said, "You need to talk to him. He's a wreck." I said, "I'm sorry." "What?" She said he was struggling. She said he'd made a mistake. She said family was family. She said I needed to find it in my heart to have a conversation. I hung up. My father called 20 minutes later. He was more measured about it, which almost made it worse. He said he's understood I was hurting. He said emotions were running high. He said things happen in relationships that we don't plan for, and the mark of a man was how he responded. I asked him if he was seriously defending what my brother had done. He said he wasn't defending anyone, he was just asking me to keep perspective. I said, he was in my bed, with my fiancée, while I was in Calgary for work. How much perspective am I supposed to have? He said, "I know, son. I know, but he's your brother." I hung up on him too. My aunt texted me 3 days later, then a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. Then my mother again, from a number I didn't recognize because she'd borrowed a phone specifically to get around the block. Everyone had a version of the same message. Forgive, heal, move forward, family is everything. Nobody, not once, not in any of those messages, said anything to me that resembled what he did was wrong. Nobody acknowledged what I'd lost. Nobody asked how I was doing first. I moved out of the townhouse at the end of the month. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in Waterloo, close enough to my office that I could walk on days when the weather cooperated and the snow wasn't coming sideways, off Lake Ontario. I got a new number. I told exactly 4 people what it was. Reese, my coworker Danny, my direct manager and my landlord. That was the entire list. I changed my email. I deactivated my social media. I started running again. Something I hadn't done seriously since university. I ran the Iron Horse Trail every morning before work, even in February, even when it was -22, with the wind chill and my lungs felt like they were being scraped with sandpaper. It helped, not immediately, but eventually. Work became the structure I lived inside. I'm a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction management firm. It's the kind of job where there's always something going wrong, always a subcontractor who's behind schedule, or a permit that's been delayed by the city, and I was Grateful for that in a way I'd never been before. Problems with solutions. Timelines you could track. I threw myself into it completely, and my manager noticed. By April, I had more responsibility than I'd had in the 2 years before. By June, I was leading a team of 5 on a mixed-use development. Going up in uptown Waterloo. I stopped thinking about them, or I stopped letting myself think about them, which is different but functions the same way. I went to therapy, Dr. Weisis, out of a clinic on King Street, covered partially, under my employer's health benefits plan. The rest out of pocket and completely worth it. She didn't tell me how to feel. She just helped me figure out what I was actually feeling underneath all the numbness, which turned out to be grief. Straightforward, uncomplicated grief. I'd lost the woman I was going to marry. I'd lost my brother. I'd lost the family I thought had my back. That's a lot to grieve. It takes time. I gave it time. 8 months passed. I know the exact date things changed because it was a Tuesday in November, and I remember because I'd just gotten home from a site visit, and I still had my high-vis vest on when the buzzer for my building went off. I wasn't expecting anyone. Reese always texted first. Danny had my number. I almost didn't answer it. I pressed the intercom button and said, "Yeah?" There was a pause then. "It's me." I knew the voice immediately. She was standing in the lobby when I came down. I hadn't seen her in 8 months. She was wearing a winter coat I didn't recognize, dark green, and her hair was longer. She was also, visibly and unmistakably, pregnant. I stood in the lobby doorway and looked at her. She said, "I know you don't want to see me," I said. "How did you get this address?" She looked at her boots. "Your aunt." I asked her, and she didn't know she shouldn't tell me. I made a note to deal with that separately. I said, "Why are you here?" She looked up. She said because I didn't know where else to go. She asked if she could come up. I said no. I asked her what she needed to tell me. She said she was 6 months along. She said it was your brother's. She said she hadn't told him yet, hadn't told anyone yet, and she didn't know what to do. I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "Why are you telling me?" She started crying. She said she felt like she owed me the truth. She said she hadn't stopped thinking about what she'd done to me. She said she knew she had no right to ask for anything, but she was scared and she didn't have anyone. I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, I want to be clear about that. Not even sympathy exactly. Something closer to pity, and I wasn't sure it was deserved. I said, "You should tell him. Whatever else happens, the child deserves to know who their father is." She said, "What if I'm not sure it's him?" I heard what she said. I processed it. I said, "What do you mean you're not sure?" She said there was someone else, a third person, someone from her work. She said it had been going on around the same time as what happened with my brother. I stepped back. I actually took a physical step backward. She was crying harder now. She kept saying she was sorry. She said she didn't know who she was anymore. She said she'd been in a bad place. She said she wanted help. I said very carefully, "You need to get a paternity test." She said she knew. I said, "And you need to find a therapist. Not for me. For yourself. And for that baby." She nodded. I said, "I can't be your support system. That's not something I'm able to give you. But I hope you figure it out." She said my name. I said good night. I went back upstairs. I sat on the floor of my kitchen for a while after that. Not crying. Just sitting. Thinking about the version of the future I'd had mapped out in my head. The wedding we'd been planning. The house we'd talked about buying somewhere in Elmira or maybe St. Jacobs if we could afford it. The kids we'd named in hypothetical conversations on Sunday mornings. All of that had dissolved 8 months ago. I'd already done the work of letting it go. But standing in that lobby, seeing her standing there like that, made the loss feel fresh again in a way I hadn't anticipated. I called Reese. He picked up in 2 rings. He said, "What happened?" I told him. There was a long silence. Then he said, "Man." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You doing okay?" I said, "I think so. I think I will be." He said, "You need me to come over?" I said, "No, I think I just needed to say it out loud to someone." He said, "Okay." Then after a second, "She's got a lot of nerve." I said, "I know." The paternity test results came in about 3 weeks later. I know this because she texted me, from the same number she'd always had, with a message that just said, "Results came. It's not your brother's. It's the other person." I read it twice. I put my phone down. I picked it up and read it again. Then I thought about something I'd never considered before. If the child wasn't my brother's, then whatever my family had been protecting, whatever reason they'd had for closing ranks around him, and asking me to forgive and move on, it had all been for nothing. He had destroyed my relationship, cost me my engagement, fractured my family, and the thing they'd been implicitly defending him for. A baby he was supposedly going to have to take responsibility for, wasn't even his. I didn't feel satisfaction. I want to be honest about that. I'd expected to feel something sharp and clean, like vindication. What I actually felt was tired. Tired and a little hollow. I didn't respond to her text. There was nothing to say that would have been useful. My brother reached out 2 weeks after that. Through Instagram, which meant he'd made a new account specifically to find me. He sent a message that said he'd heard about the test results. He said he was sus. He said he'd been carrying a lot of guilt. He said he missed me and hoped we could talk someday. I didn't respond to that either. My mother found out through the family grapevine that I'd heard from both of them. She texted the new number I still hadn't figured out how she'd gotten, and said she hoped this was finally a chance for healing. She used that word specifically, healing. Like the right conditions had finally presented themselves and now I just needed to take advantage of them. I thought about it. I want to be honest about this too, because the easy version of this story has a very clean ending, where I'm completely at peace and never look back. That's not quite true. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone when she used to call me every Sunday. I thought about Christmas dinner at their house in Cambridge, the way it smelled, the terrible jokes my dad made that we all pretended were funnier than they were. I thought about my brother and me as kids, sharing a bedroom in a house on the edge of town, staying up too late playing video games, and getting yelled to go to sleep. I thought about all of that. And then I thought about my mother calling me the wrong person and asking me to think about how hard things were for my brother. I thought about my father asking me to keep perspective. I thought about the weeks of silence from every one of them before the messages started, and how not a single person led with, "Are you okay?" I wrote back to my mother. I said I was well. I said I appreciated that she cared about the family. I said I wasn't ready to reconnect, and I didn't know if I ever would be, and I needed her to respect that boundary. She didn't respond. That was 3 months ago. It's February now. I'm sitting in my apartment in Waterloo, and outside the window the snow is coming down steadily. The kind of quiet snow that muffles everything and makes the city feel like it's holding its breath. In 2 weeks I'm being promoted to senior project coordinator. Reese and I are planning a trip to Banff in the spring. We've been talking about it for years and we're finally actually booking it. I've been seeing someone, a woman I met through a friend of Danny's, a teacher from Cambridge, who makes terrible puns and laughs at her own jokes before she finishes telling them, and I don't know yet where that's going, but it's easy in a way I'd forgotten things could be. I think about what my life looked like 14 months ago. The engagement, the shared townhouse, the family dinners, the future I thought I had. I thought that losing all of that at once was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was wrong. Not because losing it didn't hurt. It did, and it still does sometimes, quietly, in unexpected moments. But because what I found on the other side of it was something I hadn't expected. A version of my own life that was entirely mine. No one in it who didn't choose to be there. No one I was carrying out of obligation. No noise I hadn't invited. My brother is still out there somewhere. So is she. So is the baby, who had nothing to do with any of this, and deserved better than to be born into that situation. My parents still live in Cambridge. My aunt is still my aunt. They're just people I used to know now, and honestly, the view from here is clearer than it's been in years.